Hello, this is Peter Schuster. Today I want to talk with you about engineering ethics. Ethics in general is the examination of whether actions and decisions are right or wrong. We're going to look at this from the perspective of an engineer, where we are designing solutions for society's problems, and we need to consider if the process that we're using and the solutions we're developing are ethical. To get started, we should examine our definition of ethics. So let's start with a dictionary. Merriam-Webster dictionary defines ethics in a few different ways. First of all, ethics is defined as the discipline dealing with what is good and bad, and with moral duty and obligation. Secondly, ethics refers to a set of moral principles, or a theory or system of moral values. It is also the principles of conduct governing an individual or group. It's a guiding philosophy, and it's a consciousness of moral importance. For today's discussion, we're going to focus on two of these: the discipline of dealing with what is good and bad and moral duty and obligation, and secondly, the principles of conduct governing an individual or group, what we call professional ethics. There are some overriding discussion questions that I wish we were all together so we could actually talk through these, but I'm just going to throw them out there and have you think about them a little bit. Great party discussion to have with someone, because there's not, like with all things in design, there's not a right answer here, but it's something to talk about and think about. So first of all, what does it mean to be ethical? What do we mean by that expression? Presumably it has something to do with right and wrong, but in what sense? How does that apply to what we actually do? Should ethics depend on a situation? Or should ethics, definitions of right and wrong, should those be absolute? And a couple more questions. Are personal and professional ethics the same thing? When we say that we believe certain things are right and wrong, is that true in our career as well as in our personal life? And lastly, what do ethics mean for engineers? Why are we talking about ethics? I have some general observations that I've seen about ethics, both from teaching it and within my own life. So here we go. One, we all have a moral compass. So that is, we all have some way of deciding if something is right or wrong. Call it a gut feel. I'm sure it comes from our socialization. Psychologists will say, of course, that there are some people who don't have this moral compass, but the vast majority of us do. All of us would generally prefer to do the things that we believe are right. However, sometimes doing that right thing can be challenging. This is what we call an ethical dilemma, when there's a challenge there. And it's easy to slip on the ethical slope. By that I mean, it's easy to recognize that we've failed to meet up to our ethical standards, and in order to not feel bad about ourselves, we adjust our ethical standards instead of trying to improve our behavior. That's a common thing. Ethical conflicts as well might be hidden. You might not even realize that there's a decision between right and wrong going on here in any given situation. So it's being aware of that is important. So we have a few goals. Whenever I talk about ethics in a classroom, I think it's important to keep in mind what the goals are. So number one, I'd like everyone, including myself, to improve skills in resolving ethical dilemmas. And here are some tools that I hope that you get through the course of our ethical topic. First of all, get an understanding of a code of ethics. We're going to use the National Society of Professional Engineers Code of Ethics. It covers all engineering professions. There's a separate one for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. They are pretty similar. Identify situations with ethical concerns. Again, they can sometimes be hidden. So improving your ability to see when there might be a decision that needs to be made and it has an ethical component is an important aspect of being able to resolve that dilemma. Come up with a process to be able to reason and apply appropriate actions in those situations. Now, again, this is predicated on the assumption that you want to do the right thing. So reinforcing your desire to do the right thing is kind of the last goal that I have from this. So let's talk about what an ethical dilemma is. And there are two types of ethical dilemmas. One is a situation in which there's a choice that has to be made between options, but none of those are good options. They all resolve the situation in a somewhat ethically unacceptable fashion. A classic example of this is the trolley car coming down the track and you're at a switch. If the car goes straight, it's going to kill a few people, but you can redirect it and it will now kill just one or fewer people. Do you take action to reduce the harm, recognizing that your action will directly cause harm? That is one type of ethical dilemma. A more common type of ethical dilemma is a situation where there's an apparent conflict between some of your personal imperatives, in which obeying one would result in transgressing another. Now that sounds kind of similar, but here personal imperatives are broader than ethics. They include things like your safety, your job security, your financial security, planning for the future. Ethics is one of them, but it's one of many. And so we often get an ethical dilemma because we know what's right and wrong, but the wrong thing is much better for us in many personal ways. And so overcoming that is or dealing with that decision is the ethical dilemma. So when you're faced with a situation where there is a potential conflict, if you've been able to identify it as an ethical dilemma, or even to help you identify if it's an ethical dilemma, ask yourself, who's going to be helped by the decision that you make? And who's going to be harmed by it? Does the decision violate anyone's rights or break someone's promises or undermine trust? These are things that are classic in ethical dilemmas. Being aware of if that's going to happen will help you determine if this is an ethical dilemma that you're in. Are there any other alternatives that might produce a greater balance of good over harm? Often with ethical dilemmas, the most important part is trying to identify what you can do about it so that you're not stuck in this either all or nothing situation. That's never true, right? There's always a large gray zone between the white and the black. And where you are in that zone is where we're talking about ethics. Most of us would absolutely agree on where white is and where black is, or where good and where bad is in a situation. But it's everything in between that you need to think about. And you're trying to find the best balance of good over harm. And if the interests of some stakeholders conflict, and often they do, with you being one of the stakeholders, whose should be the most important or the paramount stakeholder? So ask yourself these questions if you're in a situation and you feel there might be an ethical dilemma here, and this will help clarify that. Related to that, here's a process that you might use to go through and get your way out, reason your way out of an ethical dilemma. So first off, you want to make sure you fully understand the problem, as with any problem. Determine what the facts are. Find out who the stakeholders are, who benefits from this, who's affected by it, who's impacted by the decision. And then assess what their motivations are, because people are going to, in any given situation, people are going to be trying to influence you. You need to know where they're coming from with that influence. Next, you want to find alternatives. Don't just look at 100% one way or another way. What are the alternatives that you can consider? Seek some assistance. You're never alone on this. Talk to other people. Get some guidance from people who might have been in similar situations or who can help you by seeing from the outside rather than in the midst of the problem. And then evaluate what your options are and select the best option, the best balance between good and harm. Then implement that solution, but don't stop there. Monitor what happens, learn from that. Sometimes you can revert the decision later, but you can always learn from the situation if you can't revert to the prior case. Okay, so other things that can help you with an ethical dilemma are to have some guidelines. And codes of ethics are basically that. They are guidelines that have been established by professions to help you make the determination of what the right course of action is and to reinforce that decision. Again, most of the time, we can see the difference between clear right and clear wrong. It's the gray area we need help with, and then being reinforced in our decision to push against other pressures to take something that's a little better than the alternatives. So the NSPE, National Society of Professional Engineers Code of Ethics, states that engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, So that means that is the most important factor that an engineer keeps in mind. They shall perform duties only in areas of their competence. So that means you don't go out and take on jobs that you're not qualified to do, um, and then potentially make mistakes that can harm people. Now, that doesn't mean you can't grow in your experience, and it doesn't mean that you can't work on projects that are new for you. It just means that you need to have the appropriate support for those situations. Third, they shall issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. So don't lie, right? And be objective. Try to provide all of the facts, not just the ones that support your argument. Act for each employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee. So this gets into kind of what we do as engineers. Engineers are knowledge management people. We live in the information age in the sense that we are producing intellectual property. We are producing knowledge rather than, for the most part, producing things. Eventually, what we design will become an object for most mechanical engineers, for sure. But when you are producing ideas, you want to make sure that those ideas are on behalf of the people who you are working for, so an employer or an agent. Now, the interesting thing is some of these can conflict, right? I'll go on to the next one in just a moment. But if you are being asked by an employer or a client to do something that does not hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, then you have an ethical dilemma between those two. And the Code of Ethics states that the safety, health, and welfare is paramount. So that comes first. So even though you might have to violate the trust of an agent or trustee, you are told to do that with the NSPE Code of Ethics. Number 5, avoiding deceptive acts. So avoiding things that will hide your actions. Be upfront. Don't try to trick people into making decisions. Give them the facts. Be objective and truthful. And then finally, conduct yourself honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. So this is kind of a motherhood and apple pie one, but it just sort of reminds you that your conduct reflects not just on you, but on the entire engineering profession. And the reason that engineers are respected members of society that can help to find solutions for society's problems are that engineers do conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully. If we cease to do that, then our skills would no longer be sought after by society. So collectively, we have to agree to do this. Okay, this is kind of all high level, right? Let's look at one specific example to see if we can make this a little more real. Something a little more personal to you, cheating. Is cheating always unethical? And what do we mean by cheating anyway? So let's take it even more specific. Is getting homework help from a friend ethical? And I think most of us, when you hear just that question, will say, yeah, of course it is. And I think faculty as well would agree with that. The purpose of homework is to help you learn the material. We often learn very well by working with other people. So this would be one of those pure white things, right? Yeah, that's totally fine. That is a good choice. But let's tease this out a little bit. Let's explore a little bit of the gray area. What if she helps you more than you help her? What if you copy his work? What if the friend isn't a friend, but it's a homework form that you submit a question to? Or what if the friend is the solution manual for the textbook? Are we still thinking this is ethical? Well, you can argue these points, right? These are discussion points. You could say for this one, well, if you're still learning the material, you're still meeting the intent of the homework. So maybe it's appropriate. But what if the professor specifically tells you to turn in individual work? Now, if you got it from a solution manual, is that appropriate? What if the homework is a part of your grade? What percentage would be acceptable? Is 10% okay? What about 90%? Taking your work from a solution manual at 90%? I think most of us would agree that is not ethical. So there's a gray area here, and I think it can be very helpful to take a situation and explore the gray and kind of see where you draw the line. So let's explore this a little bit more. Sometimes it's easiest to look, because I'm an engineer, at a graphical display. So suppose we have two axes, one being the importance of an assignment, the value in your grade of that assignment, and the second being the action that you're taking or the amount of support that you're getting. On the importance scale, we can say something is simply being checked to see if you did it, or checking to see if the work was okay, or grading the work, or it could be a high value assignment, or it could be a take-home exam. So that's kind of a full scale of assignment values that we might see for this homework problem. In terms of actions, simplest thing you might do is just ask someone a question and get an answer from them. You might work together on the whole assignment. You might follow someone where they do the work and you're just basically following along as they do it. They might have already done the work and you're just taking their answer or taking their full solution. So that's sort of the range of the amount of support you might get. And the question is, where do you draw the line? What's acceptable here? And some examples might be, you might say that if the only thing that's being done with the assignment is to check if you did it, it might be okay to copy the answer, as long as you have the solution process well understood. You might say that if the importance is that your work is checked, that it's okay to follow along with someone, but not actually check the final result. If it's going to be graded, perhaps it's okay to work together. If you have a high value thing, maybe it's still okay to ask a question. Maybe not, right? These are possibilities. So rather than a line, in fact, maybe what we're describing here is a curve. That the higher the value, the less action you could take. But does this mean that we're saying that the ethics are dependent on the situation? It's something to think about. So this is a bit of an example we're going to have you do as a homework assignment. And yes, it would be okay to discuss this with other people, but we do want you to hand in your own work. Okay, so just as a reminder, think about these ethical questions. What does it mean to be ethical? Should your ethics depend on the situation, or should they be absolute? Are personal and professional ethics the same thing? Is it okay to say, oh, it's just business, in order to excuse something that you wouldn't allow in your personal life? And what does it mean for engineers? Is ethics important for engineers? I just want to wrap up here by going through some key points. First of all, engineering decisions often need to be guided by other factors. We talk about ethics because ethics deals with some of those other factors. When we make a decision, it's not just based on calculations. Minor ethical dilemmas happen to us every day. Things like someone drops $1. Do you grab that and try to give it back to them, find who dropped it, or do you keep it for yourself? You're running late to get to work or to a class. Do you speed and put other people's lives at risk? Or do you just show up late and learn from the experience and leave earlier? These are actually minor ethical dilemmas, and it's worth thinking about how your actions are affecting other people and whether that is involved in your definition of right and wrong. And I caution you to beware of what I call ethical creep. So, for example, just because you made a particular choice doesn't mean that is an ethical choice. Or in other words, just because you do something that is not up to your ethical standards, that doesn't make you unethical. And I think I see this a lot where people are adjusting their definition of right and wrong based on their prior decisions. So please don't do that. Have a high standard for yourself and recognize you will not always live up to that standard. Keep trying. Don't adjust your standard, because that is ethical creep. Finally, make the best decision you can with the facts at your disposal while considering all relevant factors. Just like with design, it's not going to be perfect. There is not a perfect here. There's a better and a worse. You try to get better every time. You're not alone in this. Get some help when you face a tough decision like this. Talk to people who might have experienced it before, or talk to people that are outside of the immediate consequences, because they will have a different perspective for you. Finally, here are some cool web pages that have more information about ethics. If you find this interesting, you want to explore some ethics case studies or more thinking on the topic, there's some great places to go. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.